The novel Air Mobile War, fought by the United States Army in Vietnam, has proved the effectiveness of new concepts in tactics, weapons systems, and the employment of personnel. Some of these concepts have undergone modification or improvement under the stress of combat. One of the most significant developments to evolve out of this most mobile of wars is the addition of a door gunner to the crews of all utility and cargo helicopters. Originally, the helicopter crew consisted of a pilot and co-pilot and a crew chief who also served as a door gunner. Combat proved the urgent need of manning machine guns on both sides of the helicopter. So a fourth man, a door gunner specialist, was added to the crew. Thus, the helicopter door gunner is a unique product of the American experience of war in Vietnam. He has proved himself to be a vitally important member of the crew. This film will show the intensive training usually received by helicopter door gunners. Then we'll follow them on combat missions to Vietnam. The story will be told by a combat veteran, Sergeant Ivan Velasco, who will describe his experiences along with those of his buddy and fellow door gunner, Sergeant Dennis Troxell.
I was with the 25th Infantry Division, the Tropic Lightning, when I first heard about the volunteer course for helicopter door gunners, nicknamed shotgun riders. I had a good deal as a squad leader in A Company. So did my buddy, Dennis Troxell. You can't beat Hawaii as a duty post. We talked about Vietnam. Who hasn't? And we both wanted to go there. That's where the action was. Besides, neither one of us had any doubt about why we were fighting there. It was to give the Vietnamese a chance to decide themselves what kind of government they wanted without having the communists dictate the choice, either red or dead. But the Army wasn't buying good intentions alone. All candidates for the helicopter door gunnery school had to pass a stiff physical exam. It was the type which all air crewmen had to take. We were checked and double-checked. The heart check was backed up by an electrocardiogram. Among the many tests, the most critical were those for hearing and eyesight. Poor depth perception or color detection could flunk you, and it was easy to understand why it had to be that way. On the first day of training, we were introduced to the mechanical beast, the Huey, we'd be riding and fighting from in Vietnam. We learned about the intercom system and were given an outline of the duties of the crew chief, like how to tie the main rotor blade down. Refueling procedure, too. Part of the door gunner's job is to assist the crew chief when necessary. The helicopter team works together very closely. This orientation hour is climaxed by our first helicopter flight. We learn how to use the clock system for pointing out the direction of aerial and ground objects. We get a taste of formation flying and how to keep check on the other helicopters in the formation. The joker in this orientation flight is that it's also a test to see whether the gunner candidate is adaptable to helicopter flying and riding in the open doorway when aloft. If not, down you go, out of the course. The afternoon of the same day, we started our gunnery training. No time lost in this course. The primary weapon of the helicopter shotgun rider is the M60 machine gun. Gunners back from combat swear by it, calling it their third arm. They praised the training in assembly and disassembly. It doesn't take any imagination to see how important it is for a gunner to be able to recognize the reason for a malfunction and to correct it immediately. We also learned to use the M14 and M16 as backup weapons to the M60. The instructors were crackerjacks, and the visual aids first class. I literally got to know the M60 inside out. The real fun came in firing the weapon. Serious fun. First, we fired the M60 from the prone position. Then standing up. The gunnery got more realistic when we climbed aboard a mock-up of the cargo compartment of a UH-1B helicopter. We practiced firing the M60 from its mount. Then free-fired the weapon. In a later session, we learned to use the bungee cord attached to the roof of the helicopter. When the instructor causes a malfunction, the student grabs an M14 and keeps firing. The payoff on the gunnery course is when you get to fire from the air. First, we fly a dry run over the firing range, while the instructor points out Viet Cong type of foxholes and entrenchments. This is the Makua Valley firing range on the island of Oahu, and it's a beauty. We learned the procedures for proper visual search, which must be systematic to be thoroughly effective, plus lessons in target acquisition and identification, range estimation and ground distance and slant distance, and how all this is affected by the variables of speed, altitude, and angular motion. Tricky stuff, but fascinating. Next, a firing run over the ground targets. It's the first time gunner, chopper, and M60 work together. Now I get the feeling of what it is to be a flying shotgun rider. Each student gets to fire in a low-altitude pass over the target area. Later on, we return to the range to fire on targets from a higher altitude. Under the eye of the instructor, who sits in the open door like he's on his front porch, he insists that we learn to conserve ammunition. That M60 pumps out 550 rounds per minute. He warns us not to get carried away when firing, so you don't wind up shooting the gun inside the cabin.
Exercise!
Back to Earth. Did you ever see an Army school, no matter how busy, that didn't have time for push-ups? Ours was no different. We had the run of the pool for survival training. This was in case the aircraft was forced to ditch in open water. Using a Mae West life jacket was easy to learn and very comforting. But if you hit the water without time to put on the Mae West, you learned how to improvise. First, kick off the boots and pants. Then take the pants, along with a few mouthfuls of water. Tie a knot in the legs, blow air into them, and you have a pretty fair makeshift life vest. We also learned a few tricks about survival on land, where it wouldn't be quite as friendly as Hawaii. These classes were to recognize edible fruits and vegetables in the South Vietnam area and how to trap small animals and catch fish with improvised gear. To start a fire, we use the old Boy Scout trick of rubbing two sticks together. We're lucky the wood is bamboo, which catches fire quickly. Sergeant Alvarado, the instructor, makes like a chef, jungle style. I don't think you'll find mongoose dishes recommended by Duncan Hines, but you'll have to admit the meat is fresh. Troxel, who doesn't know when to stop volunteering, offers to help butcher the animal. Ugh, not exactly for the squeamish. Mongoose stew. Not like Mom's home cooking, but, tasty. Would you believe nourishing? There are tastier dishes. Julie Andrews, who was in Hawaii making a movie, pays us a surprise visit. She's lovely and heartwarming, just like the sound of music. But the school never let us forget there was a war going on, a grim and dirty one. Here we got the treatment in a simulated POW camp as part of a 4-hour code of conduct course. rough and realistic. Even to verbal abuse by the camp commandant that left your ears ringing. It shook us up, but it also toughened us psychologically and physically on what to expect in case we fell into the hands of the enemy. We were also prepared for the worst by an 8-hour block of medical instruction. We were shown how to give shots and other emergency medical assistance like artificial respiration, treatment of fractures and snake bites, and other aspects of the care of the sick and wounded. It was a much pleasanter shot in the arm to do a little sightseeing on off-duty time with 2 of Hawaii's friendly guides. They were pretty sights to see in themselves. Hawaii is full of great scenery. This view of the Royal Hawaiian Hotel and Waikiki Beach must have started a tourist rush all by itself. Now this was the way we should have learned survival training in water. It was a welcome change of pace. The next day we were running, not riding. Pressure from the school was constant. Intensive weeks of training had brought us to a fine edge. We were ready for combat. In a few days, we boarded a big KC-135 transport plane at Hickam Field. Not long afterward, we were in Vietnam. At first, when you get off the plane at Saigon, you feel like a tourist. But the war was close, very close. In a few minutes, we arrived at the compound of our new outfit, the 197th Aviation Company. After that, it was strictly business, and in a hurry, too. We drew helmets and flak jackets from supply. Next, a briefing at a UH-1B helicopter on the variety of armament systems these choppers carry. This one carried the XM-16 system, 4 M60 machine guns mounted on the helicopter pylons, plus 2 rocket pods with 7 rockets in each pod. Then there's the M5 system, which carries a 40mm grenade launcher besides 24 of the 2.75-inch rockets. Still another system is the XM3, which fires a grand total of 48 rockets. The talk concluded with an important safety pointer. Keep the gun barrels off the M60s unless the gun is to be used. Without losing any time, we went out on our first mission. No matter how rushed we were, each mission was carefully prepared. This one was to make an armed visual reconnaissance. First, a briefing. Nothing is more important for our team operation. Using a map, the pilot described the terrain we'd fly over and possible target areas. It is also important for the door gunner to know the whereabouts of friendly and enemy forces, the code for smoke grenades, and the precise location of friendly enemy fires. It is the responsibility of the door gunner to check the fire ports when the engine is started. This is to make sure there are no fuel leaks. It is part of door gunner training to anticipate all safety hazards and to apply all preventive measures. There is no safety rule more important than this. Stay strapped in at all times. A final step before takeoff is to check the intercom. Here the rule is, keep radio conversation to a minimum. No idle chatter. We were off, but not for long. As a safety precaution, the M60s may not be armed on the flight line, so the chopper is moved to an arming area of the field where the rocket pods are armed and the gun barrels are put on. We take care not to walk in front of them. With this done, we were on our way for real. It was a moment I would always remember, my first combat mission. On an armed visual reconnaissance, a minimum of 2 helicopters is normally used. The 2 are known as a fire team light. 3 gunships make up a fire team heavy. The purpose of the mission is to obtain information about the enemy and to locate and destroy Viet Cong positions. The door gunner serves as the eyes and ears of the crew. It is his job to keep searching the ground for evidence of enemy activity. His position in the doorway gives him the best vantage point to do this. He looks for movement, signs of enemy fortifications and road cuts, the appearance of a new track and trail activity. The Viet Cong are masters of camouflage, so it takes a trained eye and lots of experience to detect them. Our schooling in identifying targets by size, shape, color, and shadow pays off. The problem is complicated by the variety of terrain, surprising for a small country. There seems to be no end of flat, watery rice paddies, but there are lots of mountains as well, heavily wooded. A built-up area is always suspect as a VC hiding place. Worst of all is the tropical jungle, whose thick canopy makes it just about impossible for the human eye to penetrate. When the pilot spots an enemy position, he arms and fires the rocket system. The door gunner observes the pilot's rocket fire for accuracy and places his suppressive fire on the enemy. It is this kind of teamwork that makes the gunship so effective in combat. This rain of suppressive fires with all weapons by all crew members of the gunship is of crucial importance when the aircraft is engaging an enemy target. After destroying our target, we are diverted to escort a heliborne troop lift. Door gunners in the troop carriers mark enemy positions with either tracer rounds or smoke grenades. Their color depending on the code for the day. Then their door gunners open up with their M60s, forcing the enemy to keep his head down while the transports unload their troops. Ditto when the men load on again. This continuous fire protects the aircraft as well as the troops. The choppers are most vulnerable to enemy fire in this phase of the action. Now I really understood why they bore down so hard in training about conserving ammo. It was to make sure we had enough to keep up suppressive fire going into and out of an assault landing. Another mission we had was to give overhead cover to convoys moving through territory where the Viet Cong was known to be strong. We screened the enemy's flanks, front and rear, giving towns a going over as well as open country. You can never tell when a sniper will open up from what is supposed to be a friendly village. We're always on call to give fire support where needed. A Vietnamese outpost reported an enemy attack. We went in to see what we could do, only to find that artillery had already silenced the VC. All in the day's work. Homeward bound, we passed the CH-47 out on a mission. These big, rugged aircraft are primarily troop transport and cargo carriers. But they, too, carry door gunners as full-fledged members of the flight crew. Home again. And the first job for the door gunner is to safety his M60 by removing the gun barrel. Then the chopper is made ready for its next mission. Seems like a funny thing happened on the way back to the airbase. The Viet Cong did some shooting, too. Their rounds ripped through this flare box. And put some unwanted ventilation holes in the floor and roof of the airframe. No damage that some aluminum patches couldn't fix up, though. It is standard operating procedure to rearm the ship immediately after each mission, regardless of whether the bird goes out the next hour or the next day. and it's typical of the teamwork of the gunship crew for the aircraft commander to lend a hand on rearming without giving it a second thought. Troxel was doing the same rearming job on his gunship. Once the rocket tubes have been fed, the door gunner replenishes the M60s. Very often, the floor of the gunship is cluttered with brass from expended ammo, which has to be policed. This brass is a hazard to the gunner's footing, and if possible, is kicked out in flight. There's more housekeeping to be done. Whenever there is an opportunity, gun mount, and gun barrels must be cleaned. Dust and moisture from the humid climate of Vietnam are with you all the time, and the only way to take care of equipment is to keep after it with constant maintenance. Sometimes some of the other shotgun riders keep you company. It's too much to expect them to give you a hand, but it makes the chore less tedious to have someone around to talk shop with. There are times, not often, but they do happen, when there's a chance to relax. Sometimes we catch up on our letters home, or we dip into the local civilian life, such as it is. Taking one of the cycle cabs into town is certainly a tamer ride than flying shotgun on a chopper. In town, you're a target for sales pitches from all kinds of sidewalk merchants. They sell everything from fish to, well, pups. The Vietnamese do a big business with Americans looking for pets. Bargaining with the local merchants is part of the game. You're a square if you don't haggle. This time I came out ahead. I didn't buy. One more pass at the sidewalk stalls and we were home free, our money still safely in our pockets. The door gunner's workday has an open end. He's often called out at night for reconnaissance and fire support missions. The enemy likes to move and fight during the dark, so our night missions are a real nuisance to him. Besides, flying through a dark sky makes us difficult targets for counterfire. Night missions present special problems to the door gunner. Target acquisition and identification become less definite. So does range estimation. There is a tendency at night to underestimate the correct range. It makes it a long, long day, but you don't mind. The more you go out, the more you realize how important a door gunner's job is in this new kind of air war, and how much you're helping the guys on the ground.
Sergeant Velasco makes a strong case for the importance of the helicopter door gunner, just as there is a strong case for the importance of the armed helicopter in this new kind of warfare, whose ingenuity is so typically American. Its effectiveness has been proved time and again on and over many a Vietnam battlefield. An effectiveness due in great part to the highly trained, highly motivated, close-knit team in which the door gunner plays such a vital role. They have carried the fight to the communist-led Viet Cong with conspicuous gallantry and great success. Proof that the American soldier, technically minded though he is, still has the fighting heart and aggressive will to win that make him second to none among the world's fighting men. Mechanized and armor units are contributing significant combat power to the operations of United States, Vietnamese, and other free world forces in Vietnam. General William C. Westmoreland has stated that additionally, the use of armor and mechanized forces as a display of power in underdeveloped areas has a favorable psychological influence on the population and its support for national authority. The tactical employment of these forces in Vietnam had been an area of primary concern. Traditionally, we have seldom employed them in swampy lowlands or dense jungles. Such terrain is characteristic of Vietnam and is in some areas adversely affected by the weather. The weather is in turn influenced by the monsoons. The dividing line between their influence is the highlands formed by the Annamite mountain range. The wide range of terrain and weather conditions make an analysis of the trafficability necessary to set the stage for this report. Terrain and weather in each of the 4 core tactical zones vary, but there are characteristics common to all 4. We shall study each of the 4 briefly. Most of the land area in the 1st core tactical zone consists of the highlands region formed by a chain of rugged mountains. The vegetation there is the most dense found in Vietnam. The remainder is the coastal lowlands. A color key denoting the go and no-go capabilities of tanks and APCs accompanies this and all succeeding weather maps for the 4 zones. Notice that during the dry season, the ground in the coastal lowlands supports free movement in all but a few isolated areas. The mountains in the highland portion of the zone pose extreme restriction to tank movement. These comprise 70% of the terrain. In both areas, movement for APCs is about the same as for tanks. Overall, 44% of the area will support tank and APC movement. During the wet season, soft soil reduces negotiable terrain for tanks to 36%. Movement for APCs is essentially the same as during the dry season. Rate of speed for both tanks and APCs averages 4 to 5 kilometers per hour. 89% of the coastal lowlands terrain, seen here at flood stage, is negotiable the year round. Movement in the mountain region is not feasible. Elsewhere, APCs assist to give mobility to foot troops. The topography within the 2nd core zone is divided into 3 basic regions. The coastal lowlands are characterized by sandy beaches, flat river valleys, marshes, and rice fields. The central highlands are mountainous with dense broadleaf evergreen forests. Their plateau is generally rolling terrain, cultivated fields, grassy areas, and secondary forests. Movement by tanks during the dry season is best in the coastal lowlands from March into September. In the western plateau, it can be supported the year round. The remaining 45% of the terrain, mostly mountainous, can only be traversed along limited roads and paths. This terrain also restricts APC movement in some areas. Foot movement in the coastal lowlands and open areas of the plateau region is essentially unrestricted, but is considerably slower than tracked vehicle movement. The major restrictions to tank movement during the wet season are the many streams and rivers throughout the zone. The rice paddies in the coastal lowlands are made trafficable by the many roads and trails which traverse them. Bridging assistance may be required in some areas. Movement in the mountains is not feasible, and waterways also restrict APC movement. In the plateau, their velocities exceed the swim capabilities of these vehicles. APCs are used to advantage in the coastal lowlands. In both seasons, about 55% of the zone is trafficable for both tanks and APCs. Most of the land within the 3rd Corps Tactical Zone consists of the Piedmont, Mekong Terrace, characterized by dense jungle growths and by rolling hills and plains. The eastern section is bounded by the southeast coastal lowlands, an area of sandy beaches,
flat-floored valleys and rice fields. There are also large tracts of rubber plantations. A small section of the Mekong Delta is within the zone's southern boundary. The Rungsat Special Zone is a dense mangrove swamp where movement is generally restricted to boats. Elsewhere, the going does not begin to deteriorate until late July or early August. During the dry season, 92% of the terrain will support tank movement. In the open area, M48s can average 15 to 20 kilometers per hour. APC movement is comparable, but at reduced speed. The dense forests and perennially inundated land are the major obstacles which impede movement. During the wet season, which extends from May to December, movement of tanks through forests and mountainous terrain is about the same as during the dry season. This applies to APCs as well. For these vehicles, however, the waterways are easier to cross during the wet season. APCs can be used in the coastal area to assist in the movement of foot infantry. The 4th Corps Zone lies wholly within the Mekong Delta, an extensive, flat, poorly drained plain dissected by a network of rivers, streams, and canals. The U Minh Forest is a dense mangrove swamp laced with similar waterways. The major part of the plain of reeds is perennially inundated. APCs can be useful throughout the delta, but in some areas, frequent stops are necessary to cut reeds and grass from the suspension systems. During the dry season, 60% of the terrain will support tank movement. The going is slowed by numerous unfordable streams and canals. Most roads are of earth construction, and bridges are of limited width and weight capacity. Bridging and much engineering assistance would be required for M48 type tanks. APCs negotiate 87% of the terrain. Movement only becomes restricted when dense vegetation in combination with soft soil overcomes the vehicle's traction efforts. The many waterways restrict foot troops who are also adversely affected by the high salt content of the water in some areas. During the wet season, the soil in the rice paddies becomes too soft to support M48 type tank movement, which is restricted to roads. The movement of APCs is the same as in the dry season. Moreover, waterways are easier to cross. These vehicles are more mobile than dismounted troops. To summarize the going in Vietnam, overall, tanks can move in about 60% of the terrain during the dry season and about 45% during the wet. APCs can move in approximately 65% of the country year-round. The figures given here were developed during the period of the Makov study. They will be revised as areas of operation are expanded. North Vietnamese leadership has adopted a simple but effective code. When the enemy advances, withdraw. When he defends, harass. When he tires, attack. When he withdraws, pursue. The enemy employs a 4-step sequence in his offensive techniques. Prepare slowly, assault quickly, clear the battlefield quickly, and withdraw quickly. The warfare presently conducted in Vietnam may be described as area warfare, in contrast to conventional lineal warfare. Tactical units are constantly ready to deploy in any direction on short notice. Offensive operations have the general goal of destroying the enemy as opposed to the seizure of terrain. Densely vegetated areas favor the VC's tactics of engagement at close range. This unit, passing through a rubber plantation, moves into such an area. The action that follows occurred during Operation Junction City. The unit involved is the 11th Armored Cavalry. The enemy's detailed planning and meticulous preparation were, as always, in evidence. After a violent concentration of firepower, the enemy was repulsed. When ambushed, or in any engagement, the unit commander attempts to maintain contact. He employs forces immediately available to fix the enemy and develop the situation. During such actions, he uses his own organic support. He may also call in airstrikes and artillery to the enemy's rear, sealing off escape and preventing reinforcement. Less desirable, he may pull back and employ his supporting fires directly on the enemy's position. Notice occasional uniform and other violations. Such infractions have occurred in all wars. This war is no exception. They are included for their instruction value. An example of ambush action occurred in the vicinity of Suicat on 2 December 1966. A small resupply convoy consisting of 3 trucks, 2 tanks, and 3 M113s of 1st Squadron 11th Cavalry Regiment was attacked. The enemy force was estimated at 2 VC battalions, with local guerrilla forces attached. As the VC forces opened fire, the convoy reacted violently. The armored vehicles continued to move, escorting the trucks through the ambush site while pouring a heavy volume of accurate fire into the jungle growth on both sides of the road. The tanks and M113s then returned to the fight and again raked the area with 90mm canister, machine gun fire, and hand grenades. Initially, airstrikes and artillery support were called in. The airstrikes in the area south of the road, the artillery fires restricted to the area north of the road. Upon completion of the airstrikes, artillery fires were shifted to the main enemy positions south of the road. Elements of the 3 troops of the squadron, including the tank company, were moved to the ambush site. In this operation, the 2 tanks and 3 M113s were able to maintain the firefight until the arrival of reinforcements. 99 VC were killed and 3 were captured. American losses were 1 killed, 22 wounded. Intelligence, such as gained through aerial observation, favors early detection and offensive action against ambush. Reconnaissance by fire into likely or suspected sites remains an effective means for triggering an ambush prematurely, but caution must be observed when operating in inhabited areas. Among techniques not fully covered by present doctrine are new roles for the APC. Current doctrine emphasizes its employment as a carrier of troops to the combat area. When mounting 2 M60 machine guns and given new shielding and armored turret for its commander, the APC is called an ACAV, or Armored Cavalry Assault Vehicle. In its tank-like role in Vietnam, the APC is a fighting vehicle with emphasis on mounted combat. Its troops dismount only when forced to by the terrain, the presence of a large number of AT mines, or when required to conduct a search for tunnels and bunkers. In its new role, the APC is also used effectively to break trails, knock down trees, and clear heavy vegetation. Secondary roles find the APC employed as a command post, and, like tanks, are used to clear areas for helicopter landing zones. M113s are used to haul off rice and other captured VC supplies. They are also employed to carry ammunition and to evacuate casualties. The enemy is adept at using recovered mortar and artillery shells and aircraft bombs to improvise pressure and command detonated mines. He employs these and standard AT mines to reduce the effectiveness of armor and mechanized vehicles. To minimize the mine threat, APC crews make use of sandbags in the crew and driver compartments. Titanium kits for added protection are under test. Lives are also being saved by carrying crews and attached personnel on top of M113s, where they are less vulnerable to AT mines. When contact is made with the enemy, crews and squads assume normal combat positions. Tanks subject to mine action prove less vulnerable than APCs, and their crews sustain fewer casualties. Moreover, tanks usually are more easily repaired. The accompanying chart points up the relatively low incidence of destruction incurred by tanks and APCs during the period covered by the Makov report. During that period, average repair time for tanks was 23 hours. APCs averaged 34 hours. The VC's usual target is people and not equipment. He makes extensive use of anti-personnel devices. These may be suspended from low-hanging foliage to harass mounted troops, or placed upon the ground. The enemy frequently makes use of discarded material for improvised mines and booby traps. Policing the battlefield prevents his employment of such discards. Where the going permits, tanks lead APC columns and personnel to detonate mines and clear routes. The practice of following in the tracks of a lead vehicle also provides a measure of protection against pressure-detonated mines. Once a trail has been made, it can be assumed the VC will mine it. Mine incidents can be reduced by constantly cutting new trails, avoiding old ones, or saturating by continuous use of old ones. Dependent upon time and the enemy situation, dismounted troops are employed to detect and clear sections of the route considered critical. Flank security forward of the lead vehicle reduces the threat of command-detonated mines. A common formation to achieve this is the inverted wedge formation. It is employed to kill or disperse hidden personnel and to dig up and break electrical wires or trip wires from the road. The herringbone formation is employed when forward movement of an armored column has been stopped by an ambush covering a portion of the route from which vehicles cannot deploy. Vehicles close to be within sight of one another and for mutual support. This provides for a high density of firepower. If wheeled vehicles are trapped by the ambush, they position themselves to get maximum cover among the armored vehicles. The inverted echelon formation is so called because the primary direction of fire is opposite to that of the usual echelon formation. It is used where trees or undergrowth limit the traversing capabilities of tanks to fire in all directions. The enemy attempts to identify command vehicles by their location in column and by their antenna. Accordingly, some unit commanders alternate the position of command vehicles and supply dummy antenna to other vehicles. New techniques are increasing our maneuverability in terrain heretofore considered restrictive to the use of armor. For use in dense growth, the M48 employs an improvised cutting bar fashioned from the tip of a dozer blade. It is welded to the hull from fender to fender. A modification of the M48 that adds to the effectiveness of its firepower is the removal of the 50 caliber machine gun from the cupola and mounting it on the turret. This is accomplished by shortening the legs of the M3 mount and welding it into place. Consideration is being given to replacing the M1 turret with the M19. The M19 mounts the M85 caliber 50 machine gun, providing twice as much ammunition immediately for the tank commander. canister ammunition fired from a 90-millimeter gun has proven effective against the enemy at point-blank range. It has also been used to advantage to clear foliage and detonate anti-personnel mines. Similarly, the M132 flamethrower has been useful for detonating mines, defoliating vegetation, and clearing bunkers. The many waterways and rice paddies had been thought restrictive to armor. Here, new techniques minimize limitations. Bogged-down vehicles can be freed with the use of a prefabricated push or tow bar. It may be used to push or pull until traction is regained. Vehicles can also be freed with tow cables in a link-up called the daisy chain. Engineering assistance and bridging equipment are employed to cross waterways or areas which cannot otherwise be traversed. A field expedient borrowed from ARVN forces utilizes a length of timber as an improvised push bar. When not in use, it is lashed to the side of the vehicle. Another field expedient for the APC is a boom hoisting device. It is mounted on the front of the vehicle and is used for removing and installing major automotive assemblies. It is employed when terrain restrictions prevent use of the M578 recovery vehicle. A capstan kit is installed on the front drive sprocket of the APC, enabling it to free itself through use of augers, buried timbers, or other kinds of anchorage. On soft soils and muddy routes, the anti-mine technique of following in a lead vehicle's tracks is not adhered to. The purpose here is to lessen the danger of becoming mired in the rutted mud. We have learned that in rice paddies and inundated areas, a bottom that can support water buffalo will generally support APCs. It has been observed, too, that clear water usually indicates a solid bottom. In the three major missions assigned to armor, these techniques and new emerging trends find application. Search and destroy operations are designed to locate enemy installations, destroy or evacuate supplies and equipment, and to destroy or capture VC forces. During a search and destroy operation, armor and mechanized infantry units are engaged in area reconnaissance and intelligence missions, except when in contact with the enemy. The air cavalry has proven particularly effective in performance of reconnaissance missions. Its teams of aero scouts, mounted in observation helicopters, are the eyes of the troops, reporting on the enemy, area of operations, and weather. When positive enemy contact is made, scout teams undertake action. Depending on the size of the enemy force, they may attack or call for additional support. The aero rifle platoon is the ground fighting force of the troop. Depending on the enemy's strength, it attacks to defeat or contain him until a larger unit can be committed. A search and destroy mission may involve cross-attachment of units. It may also involve an exchange of roles in which armor, usually the exploiting force, is used to fix the enemy, while infantry moved by air becomes the enveloping force. The typical search and destroy mission may be accomplished in 3 phases. First, isolation of the area by surrounding it or blocking likely avenues of escape. Next, a mounted sweep through the area to disrupt any organized resistance, to detonate mines and booby traps, to locate large installations, and to destroy all possible enemy personnel and emplacements. And finally, one or more thorough searches by dismounted troops accompanied by tanks and carriers to locate and destroy any remaining personnel or emplacements. New techniques are continually being developed to meet the VC's extensive use of tunnels. It is mandatory that tunnels be thoroughly searched and then destroyed. Riot control agents or smoke have been used successfully to flush out the enemy. Within the close confines of the tunnels, pistols with silencers are the usual weapons. Captured Viet Cong may prove to be sources of intelligence. To preserve information gathered from these sources, portable tape recorders are used by military intelligence teams. Clear and secure missions are offensive combat operations aimed at driving enemy forces out of a designated area and keeping them out. They are generally initiated by search and destroy actions, but differ in that they are sustained, and emphasis is placed on seizing and holding key population and communication centers. Once our combat mission has been accomplished, the Republic of Vietnam takes over responsibility for local defense and community functions. Revolutionary development programs and civic action programs are initiated in order to extend government of Vietnam dominion and control. The broad distribution of friendly civilians throughout RVN and the inability to adequately distinguish them from the enemy places restraints on the employment of combat power. Rules of engagement to avoid civilian casualties place restrictions on its use. They vary depending on the local situation. Security missions include convoy, route, base, and area security operations. Convoy security operations can be accomplished by temporarily securing the route to be used, or by accompanying the convoy with an appropriate mix of combat units. Roads, when opened, are secured by establishing mobile outposts at critical points and conducting mounted patrols between outposts. These mobile patrol actions are locally called roadrunner operations. Increased use, leading to saturation with day and night traffic, can also preclude the enemy's use of AT mines on that route. Our security is most often tested at night. Armor and mechanized infantry's effectiveness in meeting these tests has been enhanced by a number of new devices. The Xenon Searchlight has infrared and visible light capabilities and is now being installed on all tanks in Vietnam. The Starlight Scope is one of several image intensification devices. These optical electrical scopes enable the operator to observe relatively well under conditions of near darkness. The nature of area warfare dictates greater emphasis on all-round security at all times, and in defensive positions particularly. It is achieved by selecting open terrain and longer fields of fire. Listening posts and ambush patrols provide warning and deny enemy access to the area. Within the fire support base, star positioning enables an artillery unit to provide direct and indirect fire in all directions. It provides depth to the position in the event one gun is overrun and offers an effective sheath for area fire when the howitzers are laid parallel. Bases are normally established within or adjacent to unit areas where they can provide maximum fire support with minimum displacement. An example of armored perimeter security at night occurred in the vicinity of Bao Bang, 19 March 1967. Troop A, 3rd Squadron, 5th Cavalry, was employed with 2 platoons on a perimeter around the fire base and 1 platoon in an ambush location about 1 mile north and west of Highway 13. The unit was on 100% alert. At 2300 hours, cattle crossing the highway were heard. Immediately afterward, a VC machine gun opened fire from that vicinity. The machine gun was destroyed by tank fire. At 0030, the fire base came under mortar fire from the east and west sides of the perimeter. Simultaneously, an enemy ground attack was launched against the southern sector of the perimeter using recoilless rifles, automatic weapons, and small arms. Illumination was used, and organic supporting fires were placed on the enemy. The platoon at the ambush location was ordered back to the perimeter. En route, it encountered an enemy ambush approximately 400 meters northeast of the perimeter and overran it. Armed helicopters provided close fire support. On arriving in the battle area, the platoon assumed defense of the southwest quadrant of the perimeter. At 0115 hours, the 3rd Platoon of Troop C was placed OPCON to Troop A and moved up Highway 13 from the south. This platoon was brought into the rear of the attacking enemy force and placed heavy direct fires upon it. It was then moved into the perimeter to strengthen the defense. The 1st Platoon of Troop B was placed OPCON to Troop A and moved into the battle area along Highway 13 from the north. On arriving at the east side of the battle area, the platoon attacked around the southern half of the perimeter, entered it on the west side, and assumed position to strengthen the defense. At 0300, tactical airstrikes were employed on concentrated enemy forces southeast of the perimeter. At 0500, all action ceased and enemy contact was lost. The results: friendly losses were 4 killed, 1 missing, and 38 wounded. Enemy losses were about 400 killed, 5 prisoners. The speed and firepower brought to bear on the enemy in this and other actions are impressive evidence of the role of armor and mechanized infantry in Vietnam. Lessons are being learned and new techniques developed during every operation. The combat action you are viewing is Operation Gadsden. In the course of this action, cameraman Lawrence J. Sullivan was wounded in the performance of his duty. The incident was filmed by another combat photographer, Specialist 5, Martin Steinbiss. In a later engagement, Steinbiss elected to remain with his unit, although scheduled to leave the combat area. For his conduct under fire, Steinbiss was awarded the Bronze Star with the device. By request of Major General Arthur L. West, Jr., acknowledgement is made here of the valor and devotion to duty of Army Signal Corps photographers. General West is seen here presenting the award to Specialist 5, Steinbiss.
Young man, this is a real pleasure for me. You people and people like you are doing such a tremendous job for the Army. You and your DASPO teams, as I believe they're called,
yes, sir,
are really tremendous. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
General William C. Westmoreland has said, the final story of mechanized infantry, tank, and cavalry operations in Vietnam is still being written. Each of us must continue to display imagination, resourcefulness, and ingenuity in our training and combat operations.